yourself under my protection.
Big man in a suit of armor. Take that off, what are you?
Let's put a smile on that face.
I'm touching myself tonight.
How can a woman possibly fight this?
There are two things I want to do. I want an American cheeseburger.
What's up, guys? Uz here from the DC vs. Marvel podcast, and this is another episode of Views from the Cave, formerly the Trench. And as you can see, I'm in the cave and these are my views. And today I wanted to talk to you guys about the return of Bob Iger to Disney, generally talking about the kind of business aspects there of Disney, the business aspects there of Paramount there as well, and why all of these businesses now suddenly seem to be asking for bailouts, seem to be asking for the governments to kind of help them out, and why actually a lot of these companies, the longer this coronavirus stuff goes on, are going to end up more and more in trouble. Now, Disney itself has become this massive juggernaut. I remember only 10 years or so ago where Disney was this kind of like, it was seen as, okay, it made a few kind of like animated films and stuff like that and people liked it, but it didn't really kind of, create anything that, people were going to go run out and watch, like the Avengers stuff, like the Star Wars stuff, etc. Now they've become this juggernaut synonymous with Marvel, synonymous with Star Wars, and everybody thinks, look at the amount of money that Endgame's making, look at the amount of money that Infinity War's making, even stuff like Captain Marvel, even when you think about The Last Jedi, making billions and billions and billions of dollars, right? And now when it comes to them saying, oh, wait a second, we're having to lay off, 34,000, now they're even saying 400,000 employees are going to be kind of like taken off their payroll, when they're talking about, oh, we need a bailout, we need 6 billion to be borrowed there from the banks and stuff like that. People are wondering, how the hell is that happening? Why have they not got any money saved up? Now, the first thing is basically these companies are not allowed to keep money, right? They're not allowed to keep money there within the business, right? So, you can have cash reserves there in order to buy things, but you're not allowed to have this like big savings account where you hoard loads of money, especially if the business is kind of like publicly listed like Disney is, right? That money basically goes paid in dividends to the shareholders. Now, Disney at the moment owns 64% of the company. The rest of the company is owned by shareholders. So all of that profit that you're seeing, the profit that they made over the last year or so, I think it was like 26 billion or something like that. Most of that is going and being split in between the different things. So you got 64% in going to Disney, and 66% is going to Disney, and 34% is going to the shareholders, right? So Disney straight away has lost more than a third of what it's actually earned to start off with, right? Still, that's still a ton of money, right? But you have to realize how these big companies operate. Now, a lot of when I see YouTubers talking about this and stuff like that, they're like, oh yeah, well, Disney made this much money and, there's no way they're gonna run out of money and stuff like that. And it's like, well, the problem is a lot of YouTubers have never run their own business. They've never looked at cash flows. They say that, oh, we have our own business on YouTube and, this is it, and blah, blah. But basically like selling t-shirts on YouTube is not a business, right? That is, I'm sorry to say that, I give all power to people who are trying to achieve that there, but that is not a business. A business is cash flow, employees, stock, etc., etc., etc. They don't deal with any of that kind of stuff. Now, there's a very big difference in the way these massive businesses like Disney operate in comparison to much smaller businesses, for example, like mine. Now, what happens with me is that I'm also very conscious because my business is extremely small, only has like 3 employees, but is enough to kind of sustain me and my family, etc. I'm always concerned about the fact that potentially there may be a situation where there's not enough cash flow coming in. right? Everything is reliant on the customers paying money. So in that type of situation, an extremely small business like mine is based on a pay-as-you-go situation. So what happens is that you get customers who are signing up for certain things there, and you end up buying the materials, the goods, all the kind of stuff that you need there in order to fulfill that customer's need there at that particular point. And you kind of repeat that situation. You buy that from the wholesalers go and give it to you. Now, the big problem with that is that wholesalers don't like that. And the reason why they don't like that is because their cash flow is also dependent on me buying from them. All right, so what happens is that they don't give me a good deal. They give me a bad deal. They give me RRP in effect. So it means that I end up paying more for the goods that I'm buying, but at the same time, I don't end up having cash flow issues. If I don't have any customers coming in, I don't suddenly have massive bills of stuff and huge amounts of stock of things that I've ordered that I can't now get rid of. Disney and these massive companies are not only on the other scale, they're on the other scale there with on acid, as it were, right? Or on steroids, as it were, right? So basically what they do is that they order tons and tons and tons of the stuff in, right? So for example, with Disney, they would have had food contracts up front. You know, you think Disney's this massive company and Disney makes all its stuff there itself. It doesn't. Go and turn over the any dolls, and you know, my daughter has tons of these kind of frozen dolls and stuff like that. She loves it. Turn them over, you see made in China. Look at the t-shirts, made in Bangladesh, made in India. You look at their they make these soccer balls and stuff like that. They're made in Pakistan. They've got different kind of shoes that are made in Vietnam. None of the stuff is really made by Disney. It's all kind of made by them, kind of looking at these different contractors, and they pay those contractors. However, what happens is that Disney knows that they've got this captive audience, right? And this captive audience is going to continue to bring in money there over a period of time. So they look at it, they forecast it, they see the fact, oh, wait a second, in this year, we're going to make 10 billion, for example, right? And from that, they're like, okay, well, look, we're making 10 billion. So we want this much order of food. We want the engineers to come, and we want them to fix all the rides and all that stuff there in our parks. And we want to pay them up front, and we want to get a discount for absolutely everything. They buy this amount of dolls to show in their shops, books, DVDs, Blu-rays, all that kind of stuff there. Everything is bought up front. The contracts are signed way in advance, over a year, sometimes 2 years in advance, these contracts are signed, right? Now, because the fact that these contracts are signed way in advance, you get invoices that are produced way in advance, right? So you can't go and say to a company, I want 1 million frozen dolls, for example, right? And basically like say, oh, we'll pay you in the future. Those companies want paying now, or they want at least a deposit now and to be paid there later. So that's what Disney does, right? And these massive companies do exactly the same. They go and they pay the companies there upfront, or they pay them a deposit, and then they get an invoice there for the rest of it, right? Now, the reason why that is so important, okay, is because if your input, your kind of cash flow that is coming into the business suddenly dries up, right? If it suddenly dries up, you are in deep trouble because you've got a ton of stock, right? And I know a lot of businesses are like, oh yeah, stock. You know, if you got stock, it's like having money. Well, it's not, right? Because if you've got a ton of clothes, for example, in a big clothes shop, right? And you say, oh, we retain stock, it's like retaining money. Well, it's not. You're making the assumption that you're gonna sell that stock. You're never gonna sell that stock. A lot of the stock just stays on the shelves, it ends up in sales, it ends up getting sent back to the manufacturers and stuff like that. So, you know, the main thing that is the main king is basically people coming in. Now, Disney's particular business model is that what happens is that you go and you see something on the screen. For example, you see a Pirates of the Caribbean film, or you see a Frozen film, or a Rapunzel, or something like that, right? You see it on the screen, and then what happens is that you can take that experience home. right? That is the entire business model of Disney. So they've done that with everything. They've done that with Star Wars, they've done it with Marvel, etc., etc. So what happens is you see the stuff on screen. For example, you see Spider-Man on screen. I know that's a Sony production, but you see Spider-Man on screen, right? You go, you buy the Spider-Man toy, and then you go to Spider-Man, and you see, you not only get Spider-Man toys, but you get Spider-Man DVDs, Blu-rays, etc. And then you can go to the park, and then you can go and have an Avengers theme thing at the park. You can also go and buy the Spider-Man outfits and all that kind of stuff and play as Spider-Man, etc. So it's all about bringing home that experience that you've experienced in the cinema or on the screen, right? Now the problem is for Disney now is that they're stuck. So you don't have that little advertising that Disney has of the stuff being on screen, right? Because nobody can go to the cinema. Of course, you have the Blu-ray stuff and the Disney Plus stuff, but they can't then capitalize on anything else because the parks remain closed, right? The shops remain closed. You can buy merchandise from stuff like Amazon, etc., but it's not the same as going into a Disney store, picking up a thing and being like, oh, I really want this, right? For a child, that's the kind of magical thing that they want to do, right? So that has now stopped a major part of their business. That wouldn't be a huge issue if they hadn't got all these contracts that are paid up front and they're allowed to have a huge amount of savings, because they're not allowed to do that, right? So what happens? The longer this goes on, you have to start cutting costs, right? So you start cutting off employees, right? You start cutting back on contracts. You say you're going to pay the contracts there later on, etc., etc. And your debt starts piling up and piling up and piling up, right? Now, that's a huge problem for Disney because Disney does not make these kind of like little films. It makes these massive productions. And because it makes these massive productions, they cannot suddenly cut costs and say, you know what? We're gonna make a much smaller production. We're gonna use a lot less money to produce this film, and we're gonna make it much more profitable. They can't do that. They're relying on the fact that they make these massive productions. That's their kind of their IP, right? That's their what they're kind of creating there for the customer. So they can't suddenly turn back and make something much smaller. Not only that, they've got all these massive contracts. The rides still have to be serviced, etc. in the park, and they've also got all these employees. Now, they've got a choice. Either you go into massive debt now, or you ask the shareholders for money. Now, asking shareholders for money is always a problem because your share price drops right down, but also at the same time, shareholders, they don't usually like to give money out, right? They like to be there in the good times and getting the dividends and stuff. But when they say, oh, you know what, we'd like you to give us more money, they usually don't do that. So what happens is they can do another share offering. They can start to sell off another part of the Disney business, which they won't want to do because it means that Disney has overall less control than outside shareholders. So they'll want to keep that market share. Or what they can do is they can dilute the share offering. So they go to the shareholders and they say, look, we're going to make a new load of share offerings, right? Your shares are going to be, say, halved in cost, right? And we're going to release a whole load of new shares, right? And then people will kind of buy up and etc. And that's a way of bringing us money into the business, right? And shareholders don't like that either. So what they've done is they've brought in Bob Iger to try and see if they can kind of steady this ship, etc. But there's only so much he can do. The only thing that he can do as a businessman is he's going to go to all these contractors and say, look, I can't pay you now, I'll pay you later, right? And they're going to have to accept it because their only source of money is going to be coming from Disney, right? Overall, long term, if this only occurs for a short period of time, it makes Disney way more powerful because those companies that are contracted with Disney are going to be hurting a lot more than Disney, and they're going to be desperate for that contract back there again. However, the longer this goes on, the more weaker and weaker Disney becomes. And there's this fallacy of thinking that massive businesses are much less prone to having problems than smaller companies, right? Smaller companies, if they're based on certain amount of trade and stuff like that, they can survive, they can weather this kind of storm there. Entrepreneurs can kind of weather that rather than a massive company has to make cuts, etc. This is why you see people like in our country, Richard Branson, the head of Virgin, asking for a ton of money. He's a billionaire, right? Asking for a ton of money to furlough his employees, asking for everybody to kind of bring back the, make sure that, his company still runs. British Airways are in the same pot. The airline industries are asking for a ton of money, etc. None of them have this cash. They're all banked up in assets, right? And the natural order of things is that basically what happens is if the companies have not been solvent, they've not been great, they break down, they still have the stock, somebody else buys the stock, they start a new business, it starts again, the whole cycle occurs. That's the cycle of capitalism. But what it seems like is they want the cycle of socialism, which basically means that we have these certain companies that are going to be there forever, and they ask the government for money whenever they're in trouble, and they just keep going on and on and on, whilst at the same time having the benefits of capitalism by selling you all this stuff. Anyway, guys, let me know what you think about the return of Bob Iger to Disney. Do you think it's a good thing? Do you think it's a bad thing? And what do you think about the future of our pop culture world? You can put your comments there down below.
क्यों लिया तुमने ये नाम?
माता इसकी माँ का नाम है।